Thank y'all for being here. I want to thank everybody for making this happen today, and I want to remind everybody this is a nonpartisan issue. This has nothing to do with party politics. I think the cover-up goes a lot deeper than that.
We have an unidentified flying object.
The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands.
In the murky world of inquiry into UFOs, a shadowy assembly of UFO gatekeepers is forever present. Cloaked in an enigma of secrecy, these self-proclaimed insiders and custodians of clandestine knowledge wield influence over narratives. Their presence, however, extends beyond the pursuit of truth, becoming a cautionary tale between critical free thought and obedient conformity. The UFO gatekeepers, draped in the cloak of exclusivity, dictate the parameters of acceptable discourse on the subject. Their influence shapes the narrative, steering it away from the open waters of critical thinking and into the narrow channels of orthodoxy. As seekers of truth become entangled in the gravitational pull of social cliques, the imperative to conform to the accepted narrative becomes a palpable force, drowning out the symphony of independent thought. It is here where free thought is crushed and obedient narratives are shaped, where the subject of UFOs goes from curiosity and interest into full-blown religious doctrine, where blaspheming means ostracization and targeted harassment. To become a member of the congregation, you must bow to sanctioned dogma and relinquish personal judgment. The consequences of divergence are dire, as dissenting voices risk alienation, exclusion from the collective, and harassment and intimidation for speaking out of turn. The pursuit of truth becomes entwined with the desire for social acceptance, and gatekeepers become the architects of a reality where conformity eclipses critical inquiry. You can't have dissent in your ranks if evidence-free stories are to be proliferated and believed without question, while profits are to be made. Question the narrative and you will be labelled a debunker, a person who explains away the extraordinary with the mundane. No matter how well-intentioned or truthful you may be, you become a blasphemer of the new religion, the religion of UFOs. The need of belonging to something deemed more important than yourself often obscures the importance of thinking freely. The call to question, to explore beyond the boundaries of consensus, is an entirely human trait. The imperative to navigate independently through the murky waters of evidence and inquiry becomes paramount. To surrender your intellect to the allure of social approval is to forgo the very essence of critical inquiry and to become entwined in groupthink fantasy. The scariest part is those who eventually succumb to its allure won't even realize it's happening. This, in case you were wondering, is exactly how politics works. To think freely, openly, and without the burden of conformity is to reclaim your own autonomy and discernment, to rise above groupthink and illuminate your own well-reasoned path towards a more expansive and authentic understanding of the world around you. This becomes far more difficult when you begin to understand that it's not just influencers, hucksters, and profiteering opportunists responsible for the modern UFO landscape. In many cases, it's intelligence agencies within your own government. Era of perception management has begun. Counterintelligence operatives have systematically shaped counterculture for decades. Perception and reality are two very different things. The term UAP is a sanitization of UFO. This rebranding was necessary to distance officials as much as possible from the historic stigma associated with UFOs. The war for your mind began in 2017 with the stamp of authenticity of the New York Times. Coalitions have been formed. Murky programs will be born and overseen by the very characters who have been conspiring to proliferate the UFO narrative in the modern era. And the influence of the military-industrial complex will once again expand to covertly counter the threats they actually take seriously. In the realm of modern warfare, a silent and ominous spectre looms on the horizon: the relentless advance of hypersonic drones and missiles. These high-speed terrors of technology defy the conventional boundaries of defense and instill an unprecedented sense of urgency in Western nations. Their special fuel mix allows for speed and precision, combined with advances in proprietary systems that allow for evasive maneuverability and near-instantaneous target acquisition, providing this weaponry with a lethality that outpaces the swiftest response, eluding detection until the last possible moment. This synergy of speed and precision transforms the battlefield into a defenseless hellscape where traditional strategies falter in the face of an adversary that seems to materialize from the shadows. As the hum of hypersonic propulsion systems heralds the arrival of an era defined by the convergence of speed and stealth, the urgency of Western defense intensifies. The spectre of these advanced weapons demands a paradigm shift in military preparedness, a race against time to develop countermeasures that can outwit, intercept, and neutralize these high-speed threats. The very survival of nations hangs in the balance, and the imperative for Western powers to adapt swiftly has never been more pressing. In this ominous dance between technological prowess and strategic foresight, the stakes are nothing less than the safeguarding of a future where security is no mere illusion.
And there's restricted airspace above it. We're headed in that direction now, but we can only approach.
We've obviously lost our microwave link with Chopper 9. Can someone get on the two-way radio and see if they can contact Ann and see what's going on out there? In the meanwhile, I'd like to, again, caution our audience against over-concern.
But beyond the ominous landscape painted by the threat of hypersonic drones and missiles, another enigma has emerged. Unidentified aerial phenomenon, more commonly known as UFOs. In an era where technology races ahead at an unprecedented rate, the proliferation of UAP stories has become a cloak of mystery, veiling a complex dance between the aerospace industry and Western intelligence. The tales of unidentified flying objects, often dismissed as mere products of overactive imaginations, have taken on a new significance. As the public's fascination with the unexplained grows, a subtle alliance between the aerospace industry and intelligence agencies finds an opportune haven within the shroud of UFO narratives. What was once relegated to the realm of science fiction now serves as a convenient smokescreen for the clandestine endeavours of Western powers. Underneath the guise of extraterrestrial encounters and interstellar mysteries, a covert dance is unfolding. Western intelligence and the aerospace industry, propelled by the urgency to counter the hypersonic threat of a multipolar world and rapidly escalating geopolitical crises along many global fronts, Western nations are leveraging the public's fascination with the unknown to divert attention from classified developments and defense network inadequacies. As stories of strange lights in the sky capture imaginations, the true celestial choreography plays out in secret laboratories and military installations, where cutting-edge technologies are conceived and tested for the battlefield. The future of warfare is drone technology, and it just so happens that the adversaries of Western nations are all heavily investing in that specific sector. Simultaneously, Western intelligence capitalizes on the UFO phenomenon to deflect scrutiny from classified military operations. The public's fixation on the possibility of alien visitors provides an ideal distraction, allowing covert advancements in defense capabilities to proceed without arousing suspicion.
Well, you know, it really seems like these UFOs move in very strange patterns. They're able to hover, almost standing still, and then zoom off. It seems as if they must be utilizing some other form of energy that perhaps we don't know about. Now, in terms of our present, aerodynamic technology, do you feel that we're utilizing it? We can?
Aircraft are thoroughly modern and up to date based on our present knowledge. But there is absolutely no question in the world but what there is not only a source of power of which we're not acquainted, but there is also a source of propulsion which we're not acquainted, because the UFO seem to have unlimited power, which perhaps we might obtain if we develop fusion. Fusion power is more or less goes on forever.
And how long do you feel it will be before we are flying in UFOs?
Well, this probably is the $64 question without a question of a doubt. I think it depends a great deal on how rapidly we take them seriously and how soon we really set up a scientific study team to work on the subject.
In this intricate masquerade, the aerospace industry and intelligence agencies find symbiosis, using the unexplained as a veil to shield their respective pursuits from prying eyes. As the world grapples with the dual threats of hypersonic weaponry and the allure of the unknown, a narrative unfolds, one where the mystery of UFOs becomes the unwitting accomplice to the intricate narratives of the Western defense apparatus. A hidden alliance persists, ensuring that the true narrative remains concealed within the folds of secrecy and strategic subterfuge. The proliferation of UFO narratives in popular culture is convenient for the aerospace industry and Western intelligence for very specific reasons. The infiltration of counterculture, specifically the UFO community, was pioneered in the late 1970s with AFOSI.
OSI. Are you ready?
The Air Force Office of Special Investigations, who would use widespread interest in UFOs to distribute their own extraordinary tales and to inject them directly into the UFO community, with devastating consequences. Their lies lead directly to countless derailed and ruined lives, and in some cases, lives that have been lost entirely due to their perceptions having been systematically shaped by stories concocted by Western intelligence networks, think tanks, and government operatives who would systematically infiltrate the UFO community, spread disinformation, and perpetuate extraordinary lies. It began with a shadowy group of individuals, coining themselves the Aviary, who began posting on early internet message boards, became sources for books, documentaries, and even TV shows. This was covered extensively in my previous film. The Holloman UFO landing, Project Serpo, MJ-12 documents, the Admiral Wilson memo, and Dulce underground alien bases are all cornerstones of modern ufology, and all of them are fabrications concocted by a small group of individuals who have been manipulating ufology for over 40 years. In the early 90s, an incident transpired near Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. An incident that has remarkable parallels to what is transpiring in ufology today. And once again, it followed the AFOSI pattern, as documented in my previous film, The Aviary, where government intelligence operatives pose as anonymous whistleblowers under pseudonyms and insert themselves into the UFO community, provide mysterious grainy footage to support their extraordinary claims, and then leak it to the most vocal and convenient media proponent. The problem is, the UFO videos that are leaked by government whistleblowers are never what they appear to be. They are always misrepresented, cut short, and chosen specifically to disseminate, because at face value, they appear confounding, even if the reality is far from extraordinary. The result is attention, the capturing of imaginations, and the exploitation of a secular cultural trend. It's worth noting that the Nellis Range UFO incident is not accurately dated. Numerous sources and investigators have dated the video from anywhere between the 30th of August 1991 to 1993 and to between late September to early November 1994. All of these dates coalesce around the time of the re-emergence of UFO hysteria in the early to mid-1990s. As The X-Files, Independence Day, and numerous UFO hoaxes, films, documentaries, magazines, and TV shows shaped the zeitgeist. What is clear, however, is that the Nellis Range UFO video emerged in 1995 as an exclusive with hard copy.
Exclusive, the Air Force UFO.
Accompanied by an anonymous whistleblower in silhouette known as Steve, who claimed to be a military contractor who had witnessed numerous UFO events that were frequently filmed and that were representative of an alien technology that couldn't be explained. Let's take a look.
That this does exist. Sightings are occurring more and more.
This man, we'll call him Steve, worked on top secret projects at Nellis Air Force Base, and he says UFO sightings are common there.
This wasn't the first time I've seen the videos. I've seen other videos that are similar to this. It just lent to the validity of what I already believe. They're here.
The first of two videos obtained exclusively by hard copy shows a tiny dot over the horizon. Radar operators are having a hard time figuring out what it is.
Does any of this sound familiar? The video was distributed globally by ravenous media and helped promote the myth of aliens in Area 51 during the peak of interest into the secret military installation during the 1990s. The footage of this incident reverberated around the world. If you pay close attention, the Nellis Range UFO leak played out much like other infamous cases, such as the supposed Area 51 alien interview hoax, broadcast of UFO cover-up live misinformation, and UFOs past, present and future, all of which were the result of scores of counterintelligence operatives infiltrating and exploiting the UFO community to propagate convenient disinformation for the Air Force and aerospace industry. Steve and the Nellis Range UFO has remarkable parallels to the likes of Richard Doty and AFOSI's strategic counterintelligence operations. The same Richard Doty who, on behalf of AFOSI, convinced Paul Benowitz of an impending alien invasion and systematically drove him into a mental collapse after his audio-radio equipment intercepted signals emanating from Kirtland Air Force Base. The same person who infiltrated the UFO community with fabrications on an industrial scale, such as Project Serpo, Dulce underground alien bases, the same person who hid anonymously amongst a group of counterintelligence officers who posted extraordinary tales of UFOs while hiding behind bird pseudonyms on early internet message boards, coining themselves the Aviary. And today, the same person is guest on countless podcasts, TV shows, documentaries, and all over social media, spreading his own specific brand of extraordinary falsehoods to continually get kicks out of muddying the water for his former employer, AFOSI. Whoever Steve actually is, his emergence mimicked the AFOSI playbook, the same playbook that's in operation today. Use counterintelligence operatives as anonymous whistleblowers, provide innocuous evidence accompanied with extraordinary stories, and let people's minds do the rest of the heavy lifting. Everything else takes care of itself. As the modern UFO community has learned time and time again, The Nellis Range UFO is almost certainly a collection of balloons. The erratic behavior of the object is due to parallax and artifacts of the tracking sensors on the ground. It is not defying the laws of physics or moving at any significant rate of speed. It's moving on the wind, as would a balloon. The Nellis Range UFO is simply an object that idled in to Nellis airspace, appeared to initially baffle operators on the ground, and was then used to help proliferate a convenient myth after the fact. And as you might expect, nobody ever heard from Steve again.
We should point out that none of these people who call themselves whistleblowers or are describing this supposed conspiracy came to you with evidence of hidden technology.
Right. Most everyone that came. Now, there are some that had first-hand eyewitness account of something, but that something turns out to be something else. But for the whistleblowers in the public eye, all of them did not come in. And so I really have two sets of people. I have a group of people who legitimately have something to say and share. We have others that would rather go to the public or to the Hill and not come in and share that information, which to me is an immediate red flag on the viability of anything they had to say. So I had to get a lot of the information that those other people were sharing through second and third parties, because it all comes down to the same group of individuals recirculating this story. And the story has been around for decades.
Intelligence services weren't the only groups interested in exploiting and infiltrating the UFO community. Between the early 1960s and mid-1970s, many differing religious groups used counterculture to profit from and exploit their own ideologies, none more so than the Church of Scientology, who in the late 1970s went to war with the United States government. A coordinated effort was undertaken to systematically infiltrate and remove records stored by lawmakers and intel agencies that systematically documented Scientology in an unfavorable light. This was the birth of Operation Snow White, a fully fledged espionage campaign targeting every aspect of the United States government. Agencies would be broken into, documents would be stolen, bomb threats would be made, and murders would be plotted. Meanwhile, thousands of Scientologists infiltrated every aspect of government, waging war against it from within, while simultaneously engaging in litigious warfare. This would culminate in the government launching its own investigation into the church, as its founder and leadership went into exile for the rest of their lives. In its wake, Scientology began to fragment, and those who had gone on to gain levers of power and influence within the US government would go on to shape the coming decade of research into the paranormal, particularly the Stanford Research Institute and its influence over government. Remote viewing, psychic warfare, John Alexander, and the First Earth Battalion would all grow from this pseudoscience branch of research into the paranormal. Essentially, the Church of Scientology and the US government began to cross-pollinate, as the government started to absorb members into its ranks. Scientology's Operation Snow White was transpiring simultaneously while another operation was being conducted by the US government, one with striking similarity to Operation Snow White. Operation Mockingbird, the systematic infiltration, consolidation and control of media by intelligence operatives, who would become the vanguard in capturing and shaping a modern media landscape, which now works in tandem with Western intelligence networks.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
Once Operation Snow White was exposed and the fallout began, many high-ranking Scientologists like Hal Puthoff, a name people in the UFO field will be aware of today.
Hal Puthoff, I'm a physicist. I'm also director of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin.
Claimed to sever ties with the Church of Scientology and began dedicating themselves to paranormal research while associating with intelligence agencies like the CIA and the NSA and their respective legal departments, leaving behind them a legacy of deceptive pseudoscience, with a history of being tricked by spoon-bending psychics like Uri Geller and Ingo Swann, exploitative fringe physicists like Russell Targ.
I sat in a electrically shielded room at SRI, at Stanford Research Institute, and our job, working together, is to describe where our colleague Hal Puthoff and another lab director were hiding at a randomly chosen place in Palo Alto.
Or US Army warrant officers like Joseph McGonigal.
I'm told that you can actually remote view something before they've decided where the location is.
Actually, you can. It doesn't matter. Time is immaterial to when you do the remote viewing or when the person's at the location.
So what you're doing is outside of time, then?
Outside of time-space, exactly.
Thanks very much, Joe McGonigal.
Many of these individuals eventually branched into other research fields, such as free energy, ESP, anti-gravity, UFOs, and the latest cultural trend, paranormal hotspots, where the convenience of pursuing the unknown becomes a strategic advantage and a waste of time and resources for adversaries who would follow suit. Meanwhile, counterintelligence operatives with the likes of AFOSI would quietly infiltrate the communities these people would research and lay the seeds for beanstalks they would eventually climb, becoming lost in the clouds, chasing figments of other people's imaginations. Psychological warfare as a tactic has been around for a long time, and it is used to coerce, intimidate, and deceive its recipients. It goes by many names that you may be familiar with, including military information support, political warfare, information warfare, hearts and minds, a favourite of politicians, psychological operations, and of course, propaganda. But it all falls under the same banner: lies. Lies designed to manage perceptions, designed to deceive those who believe it, and place the exploitee into a predictable, manipulatable, and predetermined pattern that can then be exploited. It is used against nations perceived as threats and exploitable of resources. It is used against the problematic segments of domestic populations who may oppose the strategic propaganda and its ultimate goals. Psychological warfare is deployed against us all, each and every day. It's there when we turn on the TV in the morning, it's there when you turn on the radio and drive to work, and it's there before you turn off your phone and go to sleep at night. Propaganda is a form of marketing, but instead of a company trying to convince consumers to purchase products and services, the government sells the public a lie that benefits the very pillars of power that provide it. This, unfortunately, is not an exaggeration. In order to function in polite society, you have to be complicit to the party line, and that line is drawn by the intelligent state. Truth can be made unfit, even if it is the truth. Mob mentality and self-censorship does everything else to keep unacceptable truths from rising to the top and being discussed and disseminated openly with any perceived authoritative mainstream source. Have you ever wondered if the news that you are inundated with actually represents the facts, when those facts may be directly at odds with the very powerful intersecting interests that run a nation? It might be worth considering what happened to investigative journalism. Today, the news has been supplanted by sensationalism and biased showmanship. If you'd like to learn more about the race to the bottom in journalism, the book Flat Earth News by Nick Davis explains how modern journalism works. An increasing reliance on speed rather than accuracy is a considerable driving factor in the downfall of factual reporting. The consolidation of independent outlets into giant media conglomerates that control and fund the editorial boards of entire swathes of Western media. The corrupted biases of editorial staff that mingle in high society and weave propaganda in tandem with the intelligence state in exchange for access. This is known as access journalism. You may have heard of that before. Access journalism is why politicians are never held to account by the very journalists whose job it is to ensure that they represent the people who elected them and not the elitist donors, lobbies and PACs who funded them. You may have noticed that this doesn't happen. Instead, it's red versus blue, left versus right, as monetized biased tribalism replaced factual journalism. Is it any wonder why the secular influx in UFO reporting in mainstream media occurs in direct tandem with geopolitical upheaval, economic downturn, and the escalation of war? Hollywood and TV productions have worked with intelligence agencies since their very inception, working with studios to plant ideas via screenwriters, producers, and directors to support their geopolitical goals. Be it the Red Scare, the UFO wave at the end of World War II, when the Western world was in a state of heightened paranoia, and lights in the sky over cities were a far more terrifying prospect, along with its popular resurgence in the mid-1970s. Propaganda and Hollywood are very much intertwined, and it's no accident that the mainstream arm of filmmaking was hijacked by the intelligence establishment early on, before the likes of Operation Mockingbird had ever been conceived, to take advantage of the most popular US export, motion pictures, eager to promote their ideals and export them to the world as they gently or overtly falsify history, demonize adversaries, and manage and maintain the perceptions of those watching the productions. Today is no different. In fact, most people may never have even heard of a man named Chase Brandon, a CIA operative who became an advisor to Hollywood in the late 1990s, after the CIA established an entertainment liaison office in 1996. Chase Brandon still operates today, and he has worked on numerous productions, many of which you will have heard of, such as The Recruit, The Sum of All Fears, and Enemy of the State, which you may notice all follow well-intentioned CIA operatives. Not the CIA conducting illegal covert activities, not organising death squads, or funding and arming terrorist militias to harm administrations at odds with the procurement of their own natural resources, and not sowing propaganda into the general populace with the explicit intent of lying to sow division. No, Chase Brandon's role was to specifically manage the perceptions of audiences by helping aid the positive portrayal of the CIA in the productions he was involved with. But Chase Brandon is no anomaly. This has been going on right under our noses all along. Propaganda is everywhere. But it only works when the recipients don't realize it's happening. There is an extraordinary amount of propaganda in subculture. In fact, many subcultures are heavily speculated to have been directly overseen by the very intelligence complex that was in vocal opposition to them. But that's a story for another time.
I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Regarding the subculture of UFOs, many people often quote the seniority of aerospace executives, astronauts, and intelligence officials, who every now and then make vague claims regarding the aerospace industry and UFOs. Some of these quotes remain in people's minds for decades, reinforcing the extraordinary possibilities while imaginations wander, seeking further confirmation of the unknown. The likes of Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works director, Ben Rich, infamously associated with a famous quote often cited as proof the aerospace industry has reverse engineered alien technology, who, while lecturing alumni at UCLA in 1993, said, "We now have the technology to take ET home." The problem is, this is not what he said. Ben Rich historically used variations of the same tag, which he used at the end of his slideshow presentations when lecturing. On September 20th, 1983, during a presentation at a defense symposium in Washington, he said, "Unfortunately, I cannot tell you what we have been doing for the last 10 years. It seems we score a breakthrough at the Skunk Works every decade. So if you invite me back in 10 years, I'll be able to tell you what we are doing. I can tell you about a contract we recently received. The Skunk Works has been assigned the task of getting ET back home." This is the origin of the quote, and Ben Rich had many variations of his presentation, which he had been giving for well over a decade. He always ended his presentation with a slide of a UFO entering the clouds, while alluding to the most popular film of the decade, Steven Spielberg's E.T. It was a joke, albeit a joke that would then be misattributed, misquoted, used in documentaries, and even fabricated as a deathbed confession as the internet began to go mainstream, despite Ben Rich still being alive at the time. If you've even had a moderate interest in the subject of UFOs, then you will have heard that quote before. This, after all, is a quote that is always cited as evidence of covert UFO reverse engineering programs. The problem is, you cannot always trust what you read, especially if the context is removed from the quotes being cited. According to Peter Merlin, a deeply respected military aerospace historian, in July 1986, after Tester Corporation model kit designer John Andrews wrote asking what he thought about the possible existence of either man-made or extraterrestrial UFOs, Ben Rich responded, "I'm a believer in both categories. I feel everything is possible." He cautioned, however, that in both categories there are a lot of kooks and charlatans. Be cautious. Psychological warfare isn't always overt, with the likes of dropping leaflets over opponents to demoralize the enemy. On civilian populations, be they foreign or domestic, it's used by politicians and political parties to demonize their adversaries and divide voter bases. It's predominantly deployed to coerce participants willingly. It's always mixed with truth and reiterated again and again. The repetition is sprinkled throughout all mainstream platforms, and it's always serving the interest of the intelligent state. But never is it more obvious than when nations go to war. And what you may notice when nations do go to war, the red and blue, the left and the right, proliferate the propaganda in unison. Propaganda works because inherently people are tribal by nature. It's easier to point fingers than it is to take time out of your busy lives to attempt to resolve fact from fiction. And what makes this all the harder in the modern world is that those who control your ability to access and ascertain actual truth are actively engaged in suppressing people from it.
Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Some conspiracies are real, and many of them, the ones with actual documentable merit, the truly bad and bizarre conspiracies, the ones in which impact us all, whether we realize it or not, are conducted by our own governments, right under our noses, with the complicity of a media establishment who shield them from widespread scrutiny. Most of these conspiracies are conducted by our own intelligence agencies, and the only way in which this can be achieved is if the media that is charged with reporting facts are complicit in ensuring that the problematic narratives remain outside of mainstream influence. In other words, perception management. In actuality, many genuine conspiracies are simply operations, conducted by the intertwining estates of financial power and politics, the intelligence establishment, and the military and its numerous branches of contractors. You may have heard of the term military-industrial complex before. Well, that is exactly what that grouping is, and all of it is orchestrated through the intelligence branch, none more so than Western intelligence agencies, such as the CIA, MI6, Mossad, Likud, or domestically within the US like the NSA, DEA, DOJ, and FBI, or the UK equivalents such as MI5 and GCHQ. All of these intelligence agencies and institutions have a shocking historical record of undeniable atrocities, actual atrocities, cover-ups, and operations which directly oppose their official mandates and stray directly into undeniable, organized criminality. The CIA, for example, are quite literally the organized crime arm of the United States government. This is without dispute, without question, a fact. There is an overwhelming abundance of evidence that since its inception, the CIA has operated with organized crime and warlords in direct tandem, not only domestically, but also internationally. Everything that the CIA undertakes has absolute plausible deniability, and that is part of their mandate, because if the truth were ever to be bluntly reported, it would quickly be understood that the CIA only exists to do illegal covert activities, and few of these activities actually benefit the people that they are charged with protecting. It's all in the service of powerful interests for resources, influence, and control. as the eternal dance between capitalism and communism continues.
Let's talk about the function of the CIA. I think a lot of us have an impression that all the CIA does is gather intelligence. Intelligence is information, of course. Now, one would think that if you obtained information that was based upon fact, and if that is so, what did you do with it?
Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA.
The Phoenix program, or Operation Phoenix, for example, which has since become a template used throughout the globe by the CIA, involved death squads, widespread propaganda, prisoner interrogation camps that resulted in mass executions, torture, mutilation, bribery, murder, and the global distribution of narcotics, like heroin, which during the Vietnam War was distributed by the CIA in surrounding Vietnamese villages to soldiers who lost themselves in drugs as they committed atrocities for reasons that they didn't even truly understand, none of which have ever been charged, or the likes of trafficking heroin from Afghanistan to America and distributing it to specific locations to target and erode key demographics. Again, this is real.
He used to smuggle drugs, then he got caught and he became one of the government's most valuable informants in the war against cocaine. But last night in Louisiana, Barry Seal's enemies caught up with him and killed him.
Then you have the South American connection with Barry Seal, who was assassinated on American soil. After becoming entwined in cocaine trafficking operations, of which he was a key part, as Iran-Contra took shape around him.
The old saying, if you can't stand the heat, don't work in the kitchen. I can take the pressure.
These are just historical examples. The pervasiveness of the reality is truly vast and ongoing today. The real world, the world that isn't broadcast on the nightly news or isn't provided to us in print unless heavily editorialized or entirely fabricated, is a far more disturbing reality. Far darker than the vast majority of people who have lives to lead, families to raise, and jobs to do realize, or would ever truly want to confront, because the reality of the situation is grim.
Dr. James Moore, a University of Delaware chemist, secretly served the CIA preparing deadly chemicals on short notice.
They were looking for fundamental information on compounds that would be capable of causing changes in behavior, changes in mental attitude.
Did you ever consider what would have happened if any of these substances were given to, say, unwitting people?
Oh, I don't remember having considered that specifically.
What if you, I trust perhaps you've thought about it.
Well, I haven't worried about it. Your question again, what would I have thought had I known that
any of these substances
would have been given to
unwitting persons?
You mean a hostile agent of another government?
No, I mean
think that was probably one of the things they had in mind.
I mean testing it out on an American citizen.
I guess I must seem very, very cold-blooded about this, but I don't recall ever having been very much preoccupied with that issue.
Some conspiracies are real and worthy of attention, and in turn reporting, but we're only allowed to hear what is convenient, because all mainstream access media is part of the intelligence state, and this goes for every nation in the world. And it doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you sit on. It's all about influence and control. News is what somebody somewhere wants to suppress. All the rest is advertising. Who can you really trust to report the truth? If the truth is inconvenient to those who have power and report the news. You may not realize it, you may not like it, but that is reality. And unfortunately, it is a reality in which we are all forced to become complicit. If you wish to learn more, I would suggest the reporting of Seymour Hersh, or the book CIA and Organized Crime by Douglas Valentine, published in 2016. Again, the point being that some conspiracies are genuinely real and worthy of scrutiny, but aliens and UFOs, beyond being a fascinating hook, it's a bottomless rabbit hole of insincerity, intelligence operatives, psychological operations, opportunistic charlatans, kooks, religions, cults, and those who are victims of them all. Believers. The only ones who benefit from UFOs are the government and its respective agencies who exploit the convenient law. For the Western aerospace industry, which largely operates without oversight, unimpeded by a general public conditioned to look for aliens and not Lockheed Martin. But of course, those who ultimately benefit most are those who also sell you their UFO stories.
Yeah, my name is Chris Mellon, and I've been tracking the UAP issue for a number of years now, since 2017, and the New York Times story that appeared in December of that year.
Ron Pandolfi, a secretive scientist with a controversial background and a number of scandals bearing his name, including moving outside of official channels concerning sensitive space technology that was inexplicably provided to China, has a long history entwined with UFO researchers, having helped guide the law in the UFO community via convenient enthusiastic believers and the Aviary itself. Despite Ron Pandolfi's presence over the decades, associations with key UFO personalities over the years, and references in official documentation, very little is actually known about him, his work, and his affiliations with the CIA, along with the murkier aspects of the aerospace industry. However, what is known is that Ron Pandolfi deploys the same tactics as counterintelligence and AFOSI operatives, inserting himself into the UFO community, burrowing into narratives, and helping manufacture the law. He was intimately entwined in the aviary infiltration and exploitation into the UFO community. His bird pseudonym is believed to be Pelican. This elaborate scheme was derived from a book that was later adapted into a film, known as The Falcon and the Snowman, in 1979 and 1985 respectively. The plot revolves around a disillusioned defense contractor and drug addict who decide to start selling secrets to the Soviet Union.
I'm not stupid, Chris. I read books.
What are you talking about?
I know what it's called. Disinformation. Counter-espionage.
What?
You're backed by the company.
Oh, Jesus.
You're one of them.
It was based on a true story. It's worth noting that in the real world, Richard Doty was Falcon.
J-12 functions as a policy-making group relating to extraterrestrial activities and contacts and UFO activities within the United States. They make the policy, obtain presidential approval, and then field activities implement the policies.
And in short succession, over 24 members from varying sectors of the official world and its surrounding subcultures began to join this counterintelligence collective, disseminating so-called UFO secrets and elaborate stories into the UFO community, many of which are still present and believed to this very day.
Our group is euphemistically called the Aviary, and each individual uses the code name of a bird as an identifier. We will continue to provide the UFO community with data, and we will continue to proceed in a way which we feel best suits our purposes.
Ron Pandolfi is also entwined in elaborate techno scams revolving around anti-gravity devices that secured funding from investors but never actually existed. And of course, UFOs. Chair of the so-called Weird Desk at the CIA, affiliated with the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, forever present in guiding the gullible with enticing nonsense. But Ron Pandolfi is a professional liar and obfuscator, aiding the government by weaving propaganda into the populace to lay cover for Western defence and to confuse his counterparts in adversarial nations. There is nothing special about him whatsoever, except for the nonsense he expects the UFO community to believe. And today, he wants people to believe that his wife is an alien who travelled to our planet through an interdimensional portal. But as history is always testament, eventually, the birds always come home to roost. The pattern is quite clear. For decades, rogue operatives within the intelligence community have been using the paranormal to fleece investors and institutions. It began in earnest with ESP and remote viewing, as believers, New Age cultists, opportunists, and counterintelligence operatives alike used the paranormal for a whole variety of beneficial reasons, beyond profit and niche acclaim. It began with the collapse of MKUltra, and an attempt to verify rumours of psychic research in the intelligence sector of the Soviet Union, as the KGB made spectacles of their so-called elite psychic warriors at chess tournaments against US opponents, and how the KGB deployed a whole host of psychics internationally to exploit and supposedly erode US interests, while strategically and conveniently getting their enemy to waste time, research and resources chasing windmills. The people used to supposedly counter adversarial psychic research quickly moved into anti-gravity research, after official interest in their activities expired along with their active pursuits, as the Cold War evaporated around them. These individuals soon expanded into so-called paranormal hotspots, and today are right at home in the UFO community, where convenience and profit coalesce. And the good news for them is that the Cold War has once again returned, and is heating up with each passing day. These legacy intelligence operatives have a history of using overly enthusiastic believers and credentialed opportunistic individuals at the fringes of their respective fields to lend their activities credibility, helping them fleece influential and gullible investors and the subculture that believes their propaganda, as they all lean on one another to help bolster their own concocted narratives. And this, of course, all revolves around money, as they weave strategic and convenient narratives that, as luck would have it, happen to be highly profitable, due to the radical base that has been meticulously groomed to fervently believe in it and relentlessly consume it. This is why so-called UFO disclosure isn't actually beneficial to this collective at all. The money is generated with mystery and perpetual intrigue, and not reality, as everyone in the chain benefits from it.
But so it's a pleasure to be around people who share a passion, because I really have been working on this almost every day, continue to, and but the good news is that we're seeing incredible progress. I mean, we're at a point now. I would not have wagered any amount of money that we'd get this far this fast.
Except, of course, for those who aren't profiting from the subject, who believe the meticulously weaved lies they're told. And in order to make it believable, it requires fanatics to drive the story, as they do all of the heavy lifting, while those in privileged positions do their best to shield themselves from public scrutiny, as they benefit from the lies. Again, overly enthusiastic believers, useful idiots, grifters, yellow journalists, bobos, and fantasists. But above all else, fanatics, those who believe without question and evidence, who attack blasphemers and champion blind belief in a modern religion. Fanatics believe, and it's good that they do, because they're the ones who ultimately become the face and take the fall.
Some of what I say may be kind of controversial, and that's good. That's my objective.
Consumers of the subject need to be forever in a state of intoxicated, perpetual anticipation. And a good way is to regurgitate evidence-free stories that incidentally come from your own inner circle, and drip-feed your marks with grainy UFO footage that is deliberately cut short and misrepresented, despite a wide availability of high-definition cameras in constant official operation. As counterintelligence operatives and aligned opportunists provide a stamp of authenticity, as they all profit from it. This would culminate in this collective of intelligence operatives evolving their playbook and risking everything to legitimize their enterprise by bringing it to lawmakers and ultimately taxpayers, who they wish to obtain funding from in perpetuity to preach actual science as they conduct literal pseudoscience, while providing absolutely nothing of real-world value. UFOs are a convenient smokescreen and profiteering racket. And if it wasn't for this scheme being solely focused on the UFO topic and the subject-specific convenience for the aerospace industry and Air Force, during the re-emergence of a new Cold War and advancements in adversarial drone capabilities, it would be laughed out of every congressional office it found itself being discussed in. These legacy intelligence operatives have a history of using overly enthusiastic believers and credentialed individuals at the fringes of their respective fields to help lend credibility to their con, as they fleece influential and gullible investors for their own government contracts and private industry consultation fees. There is a reason that those in the upper echelons of ufology pushing the official narratives are all known to one another. There is a reason that coalitions were pre-formed and used in unison to add pressure for their own hopeful money machine. They are all in on the same exploitative and convenient gravy train, in one aspect or another, both believer and schemer. You may find UFOs interesting, and it certainly is a fascinating subject, which speaks to us all on a primordial level, and there may well be one story that sticks out in your mind as inexplicable and unexplainable, but it's most likely just a story that engages you, because there certainly won't be any evidence to support any aspect of it being alien, or even real at all. And this is something that people should strive to remember, as they feel that tingle of excitement enticing them into somebody else's fantasy. Stories are just stories. Evidence is evidence. And whistleblowers with no evidence are storytellers at best and liars at worst.
Access to everything TikTok has, which means data on all Americans. And with data and with access to your app that you're addicted to, you can vastly manipulate an entire population, which the Chinese have done already.
Are you worried that our intelligence agencies are doing the same thing domestically?
Am I worried that, I know that they're not.
They're not manipulating Americans? They're not controlling the flow of information?
Yeah, did you have some evidence otherwise that you'd like to share?
It seems hard to fathom a universe that is as immense as it seems, and as void of life that isn't our own. For now, at least. Because it sure is possible that somewhere out there, life is lurking. And this is the hook. There may be a general interest in the subject of UFOs, but its engaging political intrigue, private sector convenience, and secular cultural trends, albeit waning in its current phase, have been used against the populace that believes in them since the very inception of the subject, which was also incidentally exploited by the same intelligence communities in cover for the Air Force and secret research and development.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
Is it a coincidence that the government said that Roswell was a crashed flying saucer while peak interest revolved around the subject in popular culture? Perhaps not. Is it just happenstance that over 30 years after the fact, everyone even remotely connected to Roswell suddenly re-emerged to tell their stories? After Stanton Friedman was tipped off regarding the story at a local radio station, during another peak of secular interest in the subject. The frenzy of UFOs reached a crescendo in 2023, after the 2017 New York Times article strategically set the stage for the topic's legitimacy, despite the article being concocted with misrepresentation, flagrant lies of omission, and was authored by two UFO activists masquerading as journalists, who are themselves at the very fringes of their own respective fields. UFOs would go to Congress, as a counterintelligence official would tell the world that aliens are real, and that the government is hiding them, as the very individuals who set him up for the task peered around the curtain and watched from the shadows. Fanatics and yellow journalists would set the stage and become the face of a ploy with the ultimate goal of ensuring that UFOs were taken seriously, while drones and real-world adversarial platforms of concern would take a back seat, as preformed coalitions positioned themselves to secure funding for sensors and research projects backed by taxpayer funding. The stage was set, but the problem remained that there wasn't any evidence. So what is somebody to do? You tell stories and use believable witnesses to deflect from evidentiary shortcomings. And then, on the 6th of March 2024, it all came crashing down.
I believe that our government is in possession of UAPs.
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General, and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Over the last couple of years, whatever they are, they've kind of upped the ante.
In 2022, AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, was established to look into claims of the UFO phenomenon, under the stewardship of Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, to follow evidence wherever the data may lead. From its very inception, AARO became public enemy number one for those pushing UFO stories in mainstream media. Its investigators were systematically harassed and undermined at every opportunity, both publicly and privately, by those with the biggest egos to bruise.
Total fucking horseshit. And Kirkpatrick is a piece of dog shit.
He stuck a shiv right in the ribs of his own organization.
He's a liar. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick is a liar.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick bore the brunt of the vitriol. To such extent, paranoid and delusional people began threatening him, and even turned up at his home while his family was present. This all stemmed from a core group of UAP activists and so-called insiders who began a public campaign to sow doubt into AARO's findings. Essentially, as soon as it was established, the likes of George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell, Ross Coulthard, and a collection of UAP narrative-friendly YouTube podcasts and a handful of social media cliques, along with a historical group of officials with convenient agendas to push, set the stage for a narrative of a cover-up, before any report had even begun, because they feared what it may eventually reveal.
Yeah.
And more importantly, they had no control over what it might reveal, because the Advanced Anomalous Resolution Office had no friendly UAP activists amongst its ranks, despite the manoeuvring of these activists to install their own mouthpieces into an unbiased investigatory panel. Simultaneously, the likes of Weaponized Podcast, disgraced yellow journalist Ross Coulthard, and every other friendly UAP activist with a profitable motivation initiated a smear campaign, while a new alleged UAP whistleblower named David Grush materialized and began making new sensational claims, such as aliens having killed people and that he had spoke with individuals who had direct knowledge of alien spacecraft being hidden by the United States government.
Yes.
The problem is, the people who had been telling David Grush these stories are almost all known to people in the UFO community, who have for decades been spreading the same stories with the ultimate goal of having taxpayers fund their operation with the stamp of legitimacy. The goal is twofold: deflection and profit generation, and this benefits everyone exploiting ufology, those who use it to generate profit and to attain niche acclaim, those who see ufology through tribal lines, and those with official motivation who use the topic as a smokescreen to deflect from network defense inadequacies and sensitive applications classified from public view. The likes of Dr. Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, John Alexander, Ron Pandolfi, Christopher Mellon, and others with varying historical ties to the UFO subject and intelligence world. Speculation around David Grush, his motivation, and the motivations of those who ushered him into the public light continue. But while all the speculation continues as to whether he actually believes what he is saying or not, or if he is being exploited, the fact remains that David Grush attained a high level within the intelligence world. You simply do not attain these levels without a level judgment, critical thinking ability, and the analytical tradecraft to deploy it, not unless your lineage is legacy to that specific sector. And even then, you're not exactly given free rein to make your government a global laughingstock, unless of course it has a strategic purpose, and always has.
The gentleman with me now is Bob Exler. Bob is a former NASA mission specialist. From your point of view, what is the single most convincing piece of evidence that you've come across that convinces you that we have been visited?
Well, I started out extremely skeptical about this whole thing. I thought this was just rubbish from the tabloids, but I was surprised to find thousands of U.S. government documents from intelligence agencies that tended to indicate that there was a little bit more to this than met the eye. So I went to seek guidance from the various highest levels of the United States intelligence community, and I was quite alarmed at what I was able to learn.
It is highly unlikely that David Grush is unable to discern nonsense from fact. These, after all, were his key responsibilities in many of his official intelligence duties. You would have to stretch levels of credulity to believe that David Grush has simply been hoodwinked and blindsided by the very individuals and operations he would have direct knowledge of and access to, that have used ufology for years as a vector of convenient propaganda. A war of words between UFO activists, David Grush, and AARO began, and little by little, the story began to unravel. The 40-plus whistleblowers that David Grush claims to have spoken with never actually contacted AARO, despite the best efforts of the team, consisting of experts from various analytical backgrounds from such institutions as NASA, now working for an office set up to directly address these very sensational claims, under anonymity, with stringent sanction protection. UFO activists, yellow journalists, and a small circle of IC operatives who have been exploiting the subject for decades began a smear campaign, shouting of a cover-up on every friendly public platform that would house them. That AARO was set up to cover up alien special access programs, until evidence emerged of a real cover-up, of those making their claims. It turns out that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick himself attempted to get David Grush on the record many times, but David Grush dodged every contact attempt, going so far as to arrange a meet, only to leave investigators standing around twiddling their thumbs. Meanwhile, David Grush was more than happy in the public eye, making ever more increasingly sensational claims, while also claiming that AARO didn't want to hear from him or his UAP whistleblowers.
David, we just heard that two key provisions were killed from this defense bill that basically water down the requirement to make public any information about spacecraft, about alien remains. I take it you're disappointed.
Yes, thank you for having me on today. And, what we're witnessing right now is, quite frankly, the greatest legislative failure in American history.
Waning media interest post the 2017 New York Times article was reinvigorated as this supposed whistleblower began being promoted on networks that had hijacked the UAP narrative, due to its profitable subject matter and the public interest, many of which had direct affiliation with larger conglomerates that had historically kept the UFO narrative alive in niche media circles, with the likes of Bob Bigelow, George Knapp, and Skinwalker Ranch. Kona Blue, for example, was a program being initiated by these historical UFO activists and intelligence officials to attain respectability and to have funding issued by taxpayers, as those behind the hopeful Peace app, a prospective special access program, would siphon the money with consultation fees and pseudoscience. Kona Blue was essentially an attempt to recreate the likes of Robert Bigelow's National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS for short, as an official special access program, with the shielding a sap like that would afford those exploiting taxpayer money from public scrutiny. As it stands today, new fanciful stories are being concocted, linked to new UAP figureheads like Carl Nell and Jason Sands, and others who are yet to emerge into the limelight, to shape the minds of those willing to believe the extraordinary on the basis of stories with absolutely no evidence.
Okay, so on the UAP report, the Pentagon concluded that there is no evidence of UAPs being off-world technology, but it also said the government set up programs to reverse engineer such technology. Why did the government plan to study off-world technology if it says it doesn't have any proof?
Yeah, so as you highlight, no verifiable evidence that any UAP sighting represented extraterrestrial activity, that the U.S. government or private industry has ever had access to extraterrestrial technology, or that any information was illegally or inappropriately withheld from Congress, and alleged hidden UAP reverse engineering programs either do not exist or were misidentified authentic national security programs unrelated to extraterrestrial activity or technology exploitation. So what we found is that claims of hidden programs are largely the result of circular reporting by a small group repeating what they heard from others, and that many people have sincerely misinterpreted real events or mistaken sensitive U.S. programs as UAP or being extraterrestrial exploitation.
Books, TV shows, podcasts, conferences, and private consultations. Ufology has never been about finding the truth, because the truth is inconvenient to those who perpetually make money out of the subject, and those who find their escapism within it. Most people interested in the paranormal and unexplained are just normal people seeking answers to profound questions that we have all asked ourselves at some point. It's remarkably easy to lose yourself in an alluring alternate reality, when that reality allows you to escape from the complexities of life, that for the vast majority of people is an unrelenting struggle. Some conspiracies are indeed real, but unfortunately, UFOs are simply a profitable method of making people look out in awe beyond the horizon. Meanwhile, genuine conspiracies are right under our very noses, impacting us all every day, be they financial, industrial, agricultural, pharmaceutical, or political. These conspiracies systematically repress us, place barriers in the way of actual progress, and use the language of law and order as obfuscation to divide and control us. And when all else fails, they take us to war. Disclosure would mean an end to the revenue. An entire industry would vanish. The truth is, UFO disclosure has already happened. It just wasn't the kind of disclosure that most people wanted to hear. What if there is no secret alien spacecraft, no alien bodies, no secret treaties, and no alien abductions? What if there is nothing to disclose at all? In a world that has been culturally shaped to believe that there is. What then? We're going to find out, because the same people who perpetually tell you that UFO disclosure is imminent are the very same people who keep kicking the can down the road, and are financially incentivized to ensure that UFO stories just keep on coming. Evidence is too much to ask, because it's impossible to provide. That isn't to say that you should simply believe everything that your government tells you. That wouldn't be wise. Secrets, after all, will always be kept. But when it comes to stories of extraterrestrial beings and craft being secreted away by the government, and secret programs to reverse engineer alien technology, you can be guaranteed that those stories simply are not real. And one way or another, if you're hearing those stories, the chances are much better than good that the stories themselves came from the murkier corners of the government that want you to believe them. UFO disclosure isn't imminent, because it isn't even real. Life probably does exist out there somewhere in the universe. But for now at least, the universe appears silent and dark. And that is far more unsettling to confront.
The story is so rich in intrigue that if it were fiction, it would likely be a bestseller, because all of the dead, almost 24 to date, worked in Western Europe's defense industry.
And the deaths, some bizarre by any standards, have been scattered across the continent. Only by chance did the pattern emerge. But the question is obvious. Is this all just coincidence, or has international espionage produced a string of murders?
The prestigious London Sunday Times documented a total of 22 mysterious deaths and disappearances. One of the earliest and most puzzling was the 1982 death of Professor Keith Bowden, a brilliant computer scientist who did secret work for the Ministry of Defense.
In 1982, a string of bizarre deaths began across Europe. Over the span of a decade, dozens of people would mysteriously die. Computer scientists, analysts, and engineers. And many of them had something in common. They worked for GEC Marconi, the contractual defense arm of the General Electric Company, the contractual arm responsible for some of the most sensitive and classified programs within the United Kingdom. These seemingly unrelated deaths would later be connected to a potential espionage plot to obtain and exploit sensitive information and liquidate those involved in classified projects during the Cold War. Many of the deaths were given routine explanations, but between 1986 and 1987, 6 scientists died in short succession. And these deaths were so bizarre and extraordinary that some people began to ask questions. Questions were raised in Parliament, newspaper articles were written, and journalists the world over began taking notice. Connections began being made to GEC Marconi. Many of the deaths began being directly connected to some of the sensitive programs that they oversaw. Rampant speculation began of espionage, sabotage, and murder. The reason was due to the bizarre nature of the circumstances surrounding some of these deaths, which would later be ruled as accidents or suicides. In March of 1982, 46-year-old Professor Dr. Keith Bowden of Essex University, a leading expert on supercomputers and a pioneer in computer-controlled automated aircraft, who was working for GEC Marconi on sensitive MOD programs, left a social gathering with his friends in London, got into his car and began his journey home. Along the way, he careened over a 4-lane dual carriageway, crashed over an embankment, and down into an abandoned railway yard, where he died instantly. The police stated during the inquest that Keith Bowden's blood alcohol level had exceeded the legal limit. His death was ruled an accident. However, the friends he was with prior to his untimely death were interviewed by the police and maintained that he had not been drinking and was of sound mind when he left their company.
There is, I feel, some form of conspiracy by somebody. Whether it is one side or the other side, I know not. The purpose of it, I know not.
Keith's wife, Hilary Bowden, grew suspicious of the proceedings that soon followed her husband's death. She was quoted at the time as having said, "It certainly looked like foul play." Her suspicions of a cover-up increased when her lawyer requested an inspection of Keith's car. My solicitor instructed an accident specialist to examine the automobile. Somebody had taken the wheels off and put others on that were old and worn.
Tires on her husband's new car had been changed. These are the tires. Someone had replaced them with old and dangerous tires.
These are not the tires that would have been on the Rover. They're a different sort of tire, and you can see how badly worn they are. They're smooth, and here they're worn right down to the fabric.
That's worn completely through the tread.
Completely through.
And this wear could not have happened from the accident, from the burning of the tire?
No.
You believe this was not an accident?
No, that wasn't an accident. Got me an accident with those things on his car, didn't it?
At the inquest, this was not allowed to be brought up. Someone asked if the car was in a sound condition, and the answer was yes. In April of 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Godley, 49, the head of the work-study unit at the Royal College of Military Science, vanished. His mysterious disappearance remains unresolved. He is presumed dead. 2 years later, in March of 1985, Roger Hill, a prominent expert and radar designer at Marconi Avionics, died after allegedly putting a shotgun under his chin and pulling the trigger. His death was ruled a suicide. His friends and family refute the verdict. 8 months later, in November of 1985, Jonathan Walsh, 29, communications expert with direct ties to GEC Marconi and British Telecom's secret research facilities, died after falling from a hotel window in South Africa. His death remains an open verdict. It is worth noting that when prominent members of industry, commerce or government fall from windows above 6 stories, there is usually an intelligence agency behind it, because it is straight out of the CIA assassination manuals and their Eastern equivalents. There is a documentable history of these very techniques being exploited by the murkier corners of intel agencies and their mercenary and mob contractors. Again, it's in the manuals. In August 1986, Marconi software engineer Vimal Dajibai, 24, in his final week of work for Marconi, who was responsible for the technical control systems of the Tigerfish and Stingray torpedoes at Marconi's underwater systems facility, died after plunging almost 300 feet from Bristol's Clifton Suspension Bridge. Police reports document a puncture wound on his left buttock, but this was later dismissed. The verdict on his death remains open. Once again, his friends and family refuted the allegation that he had any reason to commit such an act. Earlier that same month in Germany, NATO began to suspect sinister forces at work as 3 assassinations took place of prominent members of SDI research in their defense sector laboratories, including the research director of Siemens Electronics, who was blown up in his car.
These 3 attacks had the main target, the same target, it was the defense industry.
Later that same month in Sweden, an underwater defense expert, Svani Otin, vanished along with the equipment on his boat. It was quietly hushed over until tabloids got a hold of the story. October 1986, Arshad Sharif, 26, in one of the most extreme and bizarre demises connected to these mysterious and frequent scientist deaths. Arshad Sharif tied a cord around his neck, the other end around a tree, got into his car, turned on the engine, put his foot down on the accelerator, and decapitated himself. He mysteriously spent the last night of his life in a secluded rooming house frequently used by aerospace contractors, and had bundles of high-denomination currency in his possession that later vanished from the official records. Arshad Sharif's extraordinarily odd and brutal death was ruled a suicide. January 1987, Dr. John Britton, 52, involved in secret research for the MOD and the Royal College of Military Science, died shortly after returning from the United States in connection with his work. He was found dead of carbon monoxide poisoning in his garage. His death was ruled an accident. February 1987, David Skeels, 46, a prominent design engineer for Marconi, was found dead in his car, which had a hosepipe connected to its exhaust. The verdict remains open. Later that same month, Marconi and Defense Technical Systems engineer Victor Moore, 43, was found dead of an apparent overdose at home, ruled suicide. A few days later, on the 22nd of February 1987, Peter People, 46, was also found dead by his wife in his garage of carbon monoxide poisoning. He was positioned with his head next to the exhaust pipe on his back. The circumstances surrounding his death remain unexplained, as it was never established how he was able to position himself in the manner he had prior to his dying. The verdict is open. Just over a month later, on the 10th of April 1987, George Kuntis, a systems analyst at Bristol Polytechnic, was discovered upside down in his car in the Mersey River in Liverpool. after a car accident that claimed his life. His family had issues with the verdict of misadventure and believed that the circumstances surrounding his death didn't add up. Later that same day, on the 10th of April 1987, Shani Warren, 26, a personal assistant in a company known as Microscope, which was taken over by GEC Marconi a few weeks after her death, was found drowned in a shallow pool of water. She was gagged, her hands were tied behind her back, her feet were bound, and she had a noose tied around her neck. Attempts by authorities to claim that it was suicide were nonsensical. The verdict remained open. 1 week earlier, Stuart Gooding, 23, a post-grad at the Royal College of Military Science, died in a car crash in Cyprus during exercises that were being conducted there at the time. This was considered an accident. April 24th, Mark Weisner, 24, an MOD software engineer, was found dead of asphyxiation, with a plastic bag secured with cling film tied around his head. The verdict: an accident. 30th of March 1987, David Sands, 37, a senior scientist at Marconi's sister institution at Eashams of Camberley, crashed his car on his way to work by making a sudden U-turn along a dual carriageway and drove straight into a nearby cafeteria, where he died instantly. It was later discovered that the car he was driving contained numerous full petrol cans, which ignited upon impact. No reason could be found to attribute the death to an act of suicide. The verdict remains open.
I think the government should look into it and tell us more about it. And I want to know why, in many cases, the police at first appeared to be doing an investigation and then called it off and said, no, there's nothing else to investigate.
Are you seriously concerned that something sinister may be at work?
Yes, I am concerned that something sinister is at work. It's when you press me beyond that to say, well, what are the sinister forces coming from, that I'm not able to answer you.
On the 3rd of May 1987, Michael Baker, 22, a digital communications expert who worked on sensitive defence applications at Plessey and for Signal Corps SAS, was discovered dead after his car crashed through a roadway barrier in Dorset. This was ruled misadventure. June 1987, Frank Jennings, 60, an electronic warfare weapons engineer at Plessey, was found dead at home of a heart attack. There was no inquest. Russell Pugh, a computer scientist and MOD defense consultant, was found dead at home in striking similarity to Mark Weisner, with a plastic bag over his head, feet bound, and a cord wrapped around his body. The coroner deemed it death by sexual misadventure. March 25, 1988, Trevor Knight, 52, an engineer with Marconi Space and Defense Technical Systems, like many before him, was found dead in his car in Hertfordshire, again with a hosepipe connected to the exhaust. 3 separate suicide notes were found at the scene by his friend, who also worked for Marconi. Trevor Knight had no history of depression. It was ruled suicide. In August of 1988, Alistair Beckham, 50, a software engineer at Plessey Defence Systems, was found by his family after supposedly electrocuting himself in his garden shed. He was discovered with wires directly connected to him.
I'd pinned a fuse with paper and had a handkerchief stuffed into his mouth. It's horrible.
Why her husband installed this wide-angle peephole? Sort of strange peephole in a garden shed door.
Yes. I'm afraid I can't tell you why it's there. He must have had a reason for having it there.
His death was not ruled suicide. The verdict is open. A few weeks later, retired brigadier and marketing director's assistant at Marconi, Peter Ferry, 60, was also found dead at home, once again from electrocution, with power cords found in his mouth. There was no ruling on this death. The verdict remained open. And in September 1988, Andrew Hall, 33, a senior engineering expert at British Aerospace, was found dead in his car, with a hose once again connected to the exhaust pipe. The verdict was suicide. These aren't even all of the examples, but you get the point. A significant portion of military contractors, analysts and technical specialists, all with very niche specialities, died in short succession. Many found in similar circumstances, many with direct connections to the same companies and defense applications research. Needless to say that once these connections started being made, the story went public and speculation went out of control. This conspiratorial speculation would inevitably lead into the world of UFOs and anti-gravity research, with dots being connected of victims to sensitive research they were conducting for Marconi and the aerospace industry. Obviously, no actual evidence points to any of these people having any connection to anti-gravity research or UFOs at all. Despite this fascinating and disturbing saga becoming ever more increasingly popular in the world of ufology, none of these individuals worked on reverse engineering alien spacecraft. They worked on the sensitive military applications of their day, and that itself is enough to have made them the target of intelligence tradecraft. It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that many of the deaths here were the result of nation-state sponsored assassinations and intelligence gathering operations gone wrong during the Cold War. It is, however, a cautionary tale of how mystery can be shoehorned into personal belief. There certainly does appear to be a mystery here, but it is extremely unlikely to involve aliens and UFOs. And it is always best to keep in mind that these people have families, many of which are still grieving and believe that the circumstances behind the deaths of their loved ones remain unresolved. It is unlikely we will ever know who was behind some of these peculiar deaths. Again, if anyone. Many of the deaths do fit the criteria of intelligence tradecraft. And if that is indeed the case, those who may be responsible are certainly long since in the wind. And while people discuss these bizarre circumstances in the same breath as UFOs and aliens, you can be guaranteed that those responsible would be quietly smiling to themselves. Wouldn't it be fascinating if the CIA's very own Fox Mulder, Ron Pandolfi, and his beautiful wife, Princess Aliyah Pandolfi, descended from Kashmiri royalty no less, herself a diplomat, which 9 times out of 10 means spy, who may or may not be an interdimensional alien, set up a non-profit foundation for the preservation of wildlife, to protect it from poachers, using their very own unique proprietary drone platforms. It is extremely unlikely to be a joint CIA-ISI front to track and intercept individuals in extremely problematic parts of the world. It sure would be ingenious to hide such an operation under the guise of a wildlife preservation initiative, but the Kashmir World Foundation definitely isn't that.